While coronavirus is hitting economies and countries around the world, it's really hitting oil cities on a different level. So right now, the oil sector is facing two separate issues, and both of them are massive in scale. The first one is coronavirus, and that means way less cars on the road, flights aren't flying, ships aren't running, and all of that demand is taking millions and millions of barrels of oil out of global demand right now. The second problem is the price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia. Saudi Arabia and Russia have had this sort of uneasy truce for years, where in order to keep prices at a higher level that makes the sector more profitable or profitable at all, they have suppressed production. And that alliance has fallen apart. And so now Saudi Arabia is releasing another million barrels per day of oil on global markets. And keep in mind, they're releasing more oil in a world that needs much, much, much less than it did 2 months ago. And that's caused the price to sink to 18-year lows. And the impact has really been immediate. And for all of these cities, if you look at jobs, if you look at public sector funding, they all sort of rise and fall on the oil price.
We generally like to see high gas prices in the area, as you would imagine. The higher, the better. It's kind of the rule of thumb here. But I had noticed a slow but steady decline in gas prices, and so that's when the bells start going off. Is when you start seeing gas at $1.70 a gallon.
So in Houston, we spoke to Greg Nino, who is a real estate agent in Harris County. And he was having a great year until coronavirus hit.
You have basically no showings. It's very, very far and few between that you're going to have somebody out looking at 10 or 15 houses over a 3-hour time period. Even if there are buyers willing and able to do that, there's a certain percentage of home sellers that are just not going to let you in. I can go off of last month before this started. On my listings, I think I had 8 or 9 at the time that were active. 2 of them that were priced between 160 and 200,000 were getting 15, 20 showings over a 4 or 5 day time period. We were in a multiple offer situation. When this happened, one of those clients took her home off the market, and traffic completely just fell off the cliff right before she made that decision. And as far as everything else, there are no showings whatsoever. You're certainly not having any open houses. We're not even permitted to advertise those on our MLS, nor should we be having them to begin with. But it's a complete stop.
Economically, they are a massive, massive, massive economy. And in 2018, 30% of their GDP was based on the oil sector, directly based on the oil sector, not including all the extra services, all the extra manufacturing around the oil sector, all those grocery stores and pharmacies and houses that people in the oil sector buy. And if you think about that, that is absolutely huge.
Unfortunately, a lot of the lower paid individuals that are associated with oil and gas are going to be impacted more. And the fear is they won't be able to, why get under contract to purchase a home or even purchase a home altogether if I could lose my job in 30 or 45 days,
So in Stavanger, you'd seen a massive revival in the last several years. It had been hit hard by the 2014 price crash, like a lot of other countries and economies dependent on oil. But in the last couple of years, it had really been coming back. And in fact, late last year, it had seen the opening of the Johan Sverdrup oil field, a field off the Norwegian continental shelf that could extend the country's oil sector for decades. It had seen a lot of exploratory drilling, and it was seeing a real ramping up. And in Stavanger itself, unemployment was quite low. Real estate was coming back. The city as a whole had really started to kind of finally turn over a new leaf, as it were, from 2014 and was sort of back on top.
Stavanger being the oil capital of Norway, the oil price affects almost everything in the city and the city area. 20-25% of the employees work in the oil and gas industry one way or another, And of course, every other industry is also depending on that industry and the people that works in the oil and gas industry. We have seen quite a big change in the unemployment numbers just in these couple of weeks. It has gone up in Stavanger the last 3 weeks from about, as I mentioned, 2.5% to about a little bit over 10% now, I believe. And in the oil and gas industry, 5% have been temporarily laid off the last 3 weeks, and about 18%, it's a possibility that they can be temporary laid offs. And of course, if you look at hotels, airlines, shops, and so on, the number of temporary layoffs is enormously high in hotels. Around, I believe, between 80 and 90% is temporary laid off.
Calgary is in kind of a unique economic situation. After the oil price crash of 2014, a lot of other economies saw a gradual recovery. As oil prices came back up, they sort of fed back into the local economy. But Calgary didn't really have that in the same way. Of course, oil prices went up, but because of where it's located in the center of Canada with not really options to export by sea, it really only has one customer, and that's the United States. And in the years since 2014, the US has just produced more and more and more oil, going on to produce record amounts. And so that oil doesn't really have home in the same way it used to. And there hasn't really been a big recovery on the way for Calgary in those years since.
There's not a lot of other industries in Calgary. So almost everyone you meet will somehow or another be related to the industry, whether it's engineering or marketing or geoscience. Everyone is somehow tied into that industry. So we're very, very much in flux with oil prices. So as oil prices go up and down, that's how the Canadian economy goes. What wasn't realized in the last price war, and still I think is not recognized now, is how connected the oil and gas industry is to paying for the public sector. It generates income taxes, corporate taxes, royalties. And so these are really what pay for teachers, for nurses, for doctors, for the big social programs that we have. And as a result, we've already started to see budget cuts from the last price war. And I don't think that people have realized how bad the public cuts are going to be now.
When the oil price crashes, it's very hard to find the money and the investment to transition and diversify the economy. And when the oil price is very, very high and times are good, unemployment is way lower than the rest of the country, real estate prices are super high, the economy is booming, it's very, very hard to find the motivation to switch the economy away from something so lucrative.
10 years from now, we're still going to be using a lot of oil. 20 years from now, we're still going to be using a lot of oil. We are in the midst of a transition, but transitions take, 4 to 5 decades. They don't take 10 years. So 10 years from now, there will still be a functioning oil and gas industry in Calgary. There will still be one in the United States. There will still be one in Saudi Arabia. It might take a long time to get there, though.
The message for a lot of oil cities after every oil price crash is that these places need to diversify. They need to have other sources of income and other industries. But after this is all over, we're still going to be facing another challenge, which is climate change. And this will offer a chance maybe to radically reimagine not only what these cities could look like in a world that's not dependent on oil incomes, but in a world that's not dependent on oil at all. And that's going to be the real challenge that comes next.